Good evening. It's time to begin our Wednesday evening service. Good to see everybody here tonight. Have a very special guest speaker tonight. You'll enjoy this. First song tonight will be number 53. Number 53. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burden, soul, and liberty at Calvary. By God's word at last my sin I learned. Then I trembled at the law I'd spurned. Till my guilty soul imploring turned to Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burden, soul, found liberty at Calvary. Oh, the love that drew salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to men. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burden, soul, found liberty at Calvary. Next song will be number 727. Don has invited me to lead another one if I can. So that decision will be made after I finish this one. So. Number 727. Though the way we journey may be often drear, we shall see the King someday. On that blissful morning, clouds will disappear. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when he shall call his own. We shall see the King someday. There with all the loved ones who have gone before. We shall see the King someday. Sorrow past forever on that peaceful shore. We shall see the King someday. We shall see the King someday. We will shout and sing someday. Gathered round the throne when he shall call his own. We shall see the King someday. Let me give it a shot, Don. Number 824. Number 824. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I fly away. I fly away, oh glory. I fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I fly away. I fly away, oh glory. I fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I fly away.
Well, I guess we can say that things are getting back to normal because the traffic is just terrible again, and I guess it's like the good old days. But we pulled up and there wasn't any cars out front or in the side over here, and I thought, goodness. Has word got out that I was speaking tonight? Yeah. There we go. Well, the lighting in this room is light years better than it used to be, and I couldn't see, and I still can't. So if I have to get my light out, don't take offense. I'm sorry. It's just that I got very poor eyesight. I've always been intrigued and impressed with the life of Jesus Christ. What he did, what he said, how he lived. And you know me, I'm a student of history. I've always loved to study and read about the times in which historical figures lived and the things that they had to go through. That, living is easy today. And you think about during the days when Christ was on this earth, living was hard. As we read history, sometimes we forget how exponentially harder life was to deal with than today. And most of what the people had to do was just cope with everyday living. And especially during Jesus' time, the Jews, since they were under the dominion and domination of Rome, they had to deal with authorities. And they had to deal with the power that these authorities and the military exercised over them. They had no rights, really. I wrote here they had no human rights, and indeed they didn't. But they really didn't have a lot of rights as we think about it today. And they had to deal with the authoritative manner in which the laws were enforced against the poor, against the people that had no influence, or weren't enforced against those people who had influence, who had some money, who had a little bit of power themselves. Now, this wasn't right, but this was the days in which they lived. And still, while they were coping with all these issues, there was still the responsibility and there was still the obligation of earning a living, of working, of running a household, raising children, educating children, caring for aging parents, and paying taxes with money that wasn't necessarily available all the time. And they had all these things working against them, and yet they persevered. It wasn't a life that we would want to deal with. I'm positive of that. But it was all that they knew, and they dealt with it. And it was all that their parents knew. And it was all that their parents knew, And it just goes back generation after generation before them that they had to deal with these things. So to get back what I initially said, anytime we read in the Bible anything that Jesus said or did, I think we really need to pay attention and heed what the book says and try to figure out the point that Jesus is making. Now, I'm going to be reading from the book of John in chapter 5. And this is a miracle of Jesus. And it is one that I am particularly fond of because it is very personal to me. This healing of the lame man at the pool. Now, I know a lot of you don't know a lot about my family. Some of you do, but we have some great genealogists in this congregation. I guess Wallace is he can do genealogy and find out that he is kin to just about everybody in this congregation. Somehow he finds a kinship. Bill Eads was very good at genealogy, and Bill Eads found that he and I were distantly related through the Reverend Jeremiah Denton, who preached years back up in the Upper Cumberland area where Bill was from. And we had some kinship. Even we found that Bob Beard and I, even though distantly related, it's a much closer kinship than really we ever thought, because my grandmother was a Beard and she was related to Bob's grandfather or that generation, and it's unbelievable. And in doing some research in genealogy with my own family, I researched back, and all my family, my Webb family, came from North Carolina. And I found, while in North Carolina, back in the colonial days or earlier than that 3 straight generations of Webb men married Cantrell first cousins. So, you know what that means. I am a grade A U.S. prime choice redneck. So, that's what you're dealing with. But I do want to get a little bit personal tonight, just to show you how much this, what makes this miracle important to me. And I'm going to spend a few minutes here, and I hope you don't take offense to it. My father, Philip Webb, grew up on a farm in Warren County, just north of McMinnville, Tennessee, in a little community called Highland. And there were other communities up there that some of you might know: Midway, Gath, Faulkner Springs, Dibbrell, and all. It's up in that northern part of Warren County. He was born in 1918, just right after World War I ended. He was the oldest of 4 brothers and 1 sister, and all the boys, well, the whole family lived a normal as possible life, but particularly all the boys had normal lives. They're working on the farm, and by the time that they were teenagers, all four of these boys had to deal in varying degrees with muscular dystrophy. And of course, they never went to a doctor to have this looked at, and really didn't know what the problem was or the name that the problem had. And other than, their muscles were weakening, and I thought all my life that my father had polio, because that's what the country people up there diagnosed it as. But I guess the fact that four brothers from the same family were affected by the same condition didn't intrigue anyone enough to think maybe past the fact that it wasn't a coincidence. There was something going on. Years later, I think in the 80s, my daddy's youngest brother, my Uncle Clyde, he did participate in a muscular dystrophy study at Vanderbilt. And that's when he and we learned about muscular dystrophy, and that this particular strain was called Becker's dystrophy. And the diagnosis for Becker's dystrophy exactly paralleled the lives of those four brothers, my father and his younger brothers. Normal childhood. He used to tell me they worked on the farm, dug potatoes with the horses, did everything with their father. Of course, they didn't have a tractor. They had horses. But he had a normal childhood. But during the teenage years, muscles started weakening, and atrophy of the muscles happened during his later years, or their later years. Also found out it was a strain of muscular dystrophy where the gene that caused it was carried by females, but only the males were affected with the muscle atrophy. By the time that World War II broke out in late 1941, early 1942, my father was always already classified 1H. He was physically fit to serve. His younger brother, 3 years younger, Uncle Bill, got drafted, but he could not pass his physical. And so both brothers moved to Nashville, to the big city. They went to business college. They began working. They married. They started families and lived lives as normal as possible. Some people, when they find out this, they'll ask me, well, what happened to you? Obviously I don't have muscular dystrophy. Why was I not affected? And, quite frankly, I don't know. Another tendency of this strain is to skip generations. And thank God it skipped my generation. The first four grandchildren that were born to these brothers, we were all males. And none of us are affected. I have some female first cousins that passed the gene on to their male offspring. And those boys, not all of them, but some of those boys are dealing with Becker's dystrophy even to this day. And it's not a pleasant thing to have to deal with. These four brothers had 12 grandchildren total, and the 11 of us who lived to adulthood all watched our father's age, and as they aged, they got weaker and weaker and weaker until they were all wheelchair bound in their later years. They all died in their mid-60s, and their bodies were completely worn out, much older than their physical age. And that's my family story. But I want to read this passage in John 5, and I hope you can see why this miracle has such a hold on me. Now, and I'm going to read first few verses of this, and this is an account of a man, one of many disabled people at this pool, and they're all there for one reason: they're waiting for a miracle. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now, there was in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. So it's a very ornate place. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. Just to stop here just a second, as you're reading this, do you see something unusual in these verses? Have you read that? You'll see that you go from verse 3 to verse 5. And verse 4 is not in all Bibles. So I'm going to read verse 4, because verse 4 is usually in a footnote at the bottom, and it will tell you what has been left out. Now, most likely this was added later by some scholars or some scribes to explain why so many people were there at that pool and why they raced to get into the pool when the water moved. I think this one verse just brings out the whole thing and puts it into perspective, and it makes sense. Okay, so I'll go through verse 3 again. Here, a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. And they waited for the moving of the waters. From time to time, an angel of the Lord would come down and stir up the waters. The first one into the pool after each disturbance would be cured of whatever disease he had. So, without that explanation, you just get the impression that people just took their sick family members and just left them at that pool, every day. But they were there for a purpose. Now, let's see here. Where are we? In verse 5, one who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. We don't know if he was 38 years old, if he'd been born disabled, or if he had an accident as growing up or as a man, or if he had a stroke that disabled him. But we don't know if he was a young man in his mid-30s or an older person. But anyway, he had been an invalid for 38 years. Now, just to say, I cannot explain this happening. I can't explain it. It was solely a God thing. We don't know how often it happened. And we're told that an angel of the Lord came and stirred the waters, and then the people would clamor to be the first one into the pool, because we're told they would be cured of whatever disease that they had. So that's why this man, been an invalid for 38 years, was there. And we don't know how often this happened, but apparently, after reading the rest of this, we'll see as Jesus talks to this man, it happened often enough that a crowd accumulated. We don't know what caused them to know that it was going to happen, or maybe they were just there hoping it would happen. But of course, it was a miracle. The man that was paralyzed for 30 years had tried numerous times to get into the pool, because he told Jesus, whenever I try to get in, somebody gets in there before me. Now, in your mind, just imagine those people, the blind people, the lame people, the paralyzed people. They were all there trying to do the same thing. And when those waters were troubled or stirred, can you imagine the flurry of activity that was going on? Crippled people trying to get up, blind people trying to find their way. And I'm sure that some of their handlers were there trying to pick them up and throw them into the water. There was a frenzy to be first. And again, this was a divine happening. But to get into that pool, to be first, required an effort on the part of the person that was wanting to be healed. You physically had to do something. You couldn't just lay there. You had to get to that pool and be the first one in. So the winner got into the pool. He was blessed that day. Contrast that flurry of activity with what Jesus does. In verse 7, to verse 6. Yes. Yes, sir. Jesus says to this man. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he said something very simple. Sir, do you want to be well? You want to get well? And sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. And while I'm trying to get in, someone else goes ahead of me. What did Jesus say? Did he say, get closer to the pool, try to roll in there first? I'm sure he was close to the pool. Jesus said, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Jesus contrasted with somebody had to actually do something to get in that water to be healed. Jesus required nothing on the part of the disabled. And I could see my father laying there. When I was a kid, saw my father laying there, wishing that he had a miracle. You know, that Jesus would come up to him and say, Philip, get up from there. Run over there to that pool and jump in. You know, I always imagined something like that happening to my father, but, you know, that was a child's wish. And instead of getting better, you know, as I grew up, I saw him, you know, get older and older and weaker. But my father it was physically unable for him to get up. If he was lying on a mat, he wasn't going to get up. He certainly wasn't going to walk over to the pool and be able to jump in. It was humanly impossible. And never could he do that, much less be first. But the invalid, he was in the same situation. But all he had to do is do what Jesus asked him to do. And then what happened? Verse 9. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. Now, we can contrast that with the man that we call the rich young ruler. He goes to Jesus and he says, what can I do to inherit eternal life? And what did Jesus tell him to do? He said, you know, obey the rules. Don't commit adultery. What else did he tell him not to do? Honor your father and mother. Don't lie. There's a couple other things. And it was like when Jesus was saying that, he was looking at Jesus. Okay, check. Check. I've done this all my life. I've done this when I was a young man. And then Jesus says, there's one more thing that you need to do. And what did he say to him then? Sell all your possessions and give them to the poor. And he couldn't do it. The one thing that Jesus asked him to do, he couldn't do it. So what did he ask this man at the pool? He asked him a question. He said, do you want to be healed? He said, yes, sir, I want to be healed, but I can't get in there. He said, well, then get up, pick up your mat, and walk. What was the difference? Jesus could see people, could see into people, and he saw that rich young ruler. I'm sure he was a good person, but Jesus looked at that heart. The divine nature of Jesus allowed him to see into people's hearts and to know things in a very divine way. He knew this man had a desire to be healed. And obviously he did believe, otherwise why would he be there? But he couldn't do it. He wanted to, but he couldn't physically do it. So what is the lesson to us? All we have to do to be spiritually healed is do the same thing as this man. Symbolically, pick up our mat and walk with Jesus. Jesus said in Mark 10:27, he made this promise. With man, this is impossible, but what? With God, all things are possible. And it certainly was in this particular case here at the pool at Bethesda. So what do we need to do? We need to believe in him. We need to have faith in him. We need to trust in him. But the point of this healing here is we need to walk with him, because there's nothing humanly possible we can do to save ourselves. This is something people cannot do, but God can. We all know he can do anything. So I appreciate your attention tonight and your comments, and for giving me the opportunity to let you know a little bit about what comes from my family. We'll have a prayer in just a few minutes.